Hello and welcome to my podcast where we are going to explore the connections between engineering, technology, humanities, and arts. Today we'll be talking about one of the best examples of biomimicry, which is Velcro. Almost everyone has used Velcro at some point, whether it was on a pair of shoes, a backpack, a jacket, or even medical equipment. It's such a common product that most of us never stop to think about where the idea actually came from. What's interesting is that Velcro wasn't invented by sitting in a laboratory trying to create a new fastener. Instead, the idea came from something people usually find annoying: a burr stuck to someone's clothes. Today, I'll explain how that happened, why engineers realized it could become a useful invention, and why Velcro is still important today. The story all begins in 1941 with a Swiss engineer named George D. Mistral. One day, he was hiking with his dog through the woods. After the hike, he noticed burrs had attached themselves to both his clothing and his dog's fur. Most people would probably just pull the burrs off, throw them away, without thinking twice about it. George was different. Instead of seeing them as a nuisance, he became curious. He wanted to understand why they stuck so well. When he looked at one of the burrs under a microscope, he noticed that it was covered with hundreds of tiny hooks. Those hooks naturally grabbed onto the small loops in the fabric and animal fur, making the burr surprisingly difficult to remove. That simple observation is what makes this such a great engineering story. The invention didn't begin with a complicated design process. It began with curiosity. One person noticed something in nature that everyone else ignored and asked a simple question: why does this work so well? After understanding how the burr worked, George D. Mistral started wondering whether the same concept could be used to create a reusable fastening system. This turned out to be much harder than it sounds. He spent years experimenting with different materials and manufacturing methods. Many materials either wore out too quickly or couldn't reliably form the tiny hooks needed for the design. Eventually, he discovered that nylon worked extremely well. When heated and shaped correctly, nylon could form strong, flexible hooks that would repeatedly attach to matching loops without breaking. This led to the hook and loop fastening system we know as Velcro. One thing I think is really interesting is how much engineering went into turning a simple observation into a real product. The basic idea came from nature, but engineers still had to figure out the right materials, develop manufacturing methods, test durability, and make sure it would survive thousands of uses. Testing the durability is something that I can relate to in a way, being that I currently have an internship in R&D, so I'm constantly testing things that people design that come from some crazy idea. Little bit of a side note, but for example, today I was testing a concept and it didn't work, but that just is one step in the right direction to, creating a concept that does work. It's just kind of cool to see a similar thing to this that I experienced today. To get back on topic, I sometimes think that all of these things are something that people overlook. Nature may provide inspiration, but engineering is what turns an idea into something that can actually be manufactured and sold. Once Velcro was successfully developed, it quickly found uses in many different industries. Most people think about shoes or clothing first, but that's only a small part of where Velcro is used today. You'll find it on a backpack, luggage, sporting equipment, medical braces, military gear, and protective equipment. Hospitals use it because it's fast, adjustable, and easy for patients to use. One of the coolest applications is aerospace. NASA has used Velcro during space missions to keep tools and equipment from floating around inside spacecraft. In, for example, like a zero-gravity environment, even simple objects can become difficult to manage, so having a reusable fastening system becomes extremely useful. This shows how an idea inspired by nature can eventually become important in environments that are completely different from where it originated. It's pretty amazing that something inspired by a tiny burr found on a hiking trail eventually became useful in space exploration. I think Velcro is one of the best examples of biomimicry because it reminds us that engineering doesn't always require inventing something completely new. Sometimes the best solutions already exist in nature. Plants, animals, and ecosystems have been adapting and improving for millions of years. Engineers can study those natural designs and apply the same principles to solve human problems. Today, there are many examples of biomimicry besides Velcro. Bullet trains were redesigned based on the shape of a kingfisher's beak to reduce noise. Shark skin was inspired antibacterial surface designs. Gecko feet have inspired new types of adhesives that don't even require glue. These examples all follow the same pattern. Engineers observe something in nature, understand why it works, and then apply those ideas to technology. Velcro just happens to be one of the earliest and most recognizable examples. To wrap everything up, Velcro started with one engineer paying attention to something that most people would have ignored. George de Menstral noticed burrs sticking to clothing and fur, studied how they worked, and eventually turned that natural design into one of the most widely used fastening systems in the world. The process followed the same engineering pattern we often see today: discover a problem or observation, evaluate possible solutions, and finally exploit or apply that solution in the real world. I think this story is a great reminder that innovation doesn't always come from creating something completely new. Sometimes it comes from looking more closely at the world around us and learning from nature. Thanks for listening, and I hope next time you use a piece of Velcro, you'll remember that it all started with a simple walk through the woods.